Good evening, friends, and welcome back to Horror Whispers. Tonight we'll be sharing 13 haunted trucker stories from Mississippi Delta roads. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you'll never miss another night of chilling tales. Now, let's begin. My name is Calvin Brooks. For 25 years I've been a long-haul trucker, and for most of that time my life has been measured in mile markers and cups of burnt coffee. I've seen blizzards in the Rockies that could bury a rig whole, and I've felt the kind of desert heat in Arizona that makes the air itself feel like a physical weight. I've seen accidents, breakdowns, and every shade of human desperation at 3 in the morning in a greasy spoon diner. I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. The road that taught me just how wrong I was is one I've driven 1,000 times. U.S. Route 61, the old blues highway cutting right through the heart of the Mississippi Delta. This particular run happened on a Tuesday night in late October. The air had that first real bite of autumn in it, a damp chill that promised a cold winter. I was hauling a load of processed chicken from Memphis down to Vicksburg, a straight shot down 61. It's a lonely stretch of road, especially after midnight. The towns are few and far between, little islands of flickering light in an ocean of dark, flat earth. That night, the fog was something else. It wasn't just fog, it was a living thing. A thick, soupy miasma that rolled in from the swamps and cotton fields, swallowing the world whole. My headlights could barely punch 10 feet in front of my grill, turning the journey into a slow, nerve-wracking crawl. The only company I had was the radio, a local station out of Clarksdale playing a scratchy recording of some old bluesman moaning about a two-faced woman. The music was fitting for the landscape. The Delta is a place that feels heavy with history, with stories. You drive past those endless fields, and you can almost feel the ghosts of sharecroppers, hear the echoes of field hollers carried on the wind. It's a place where the past isn't just remembered, it's a constant breathing presence. That night it felt like the past was breathing right down my neck. I was somewhere south of Leland, the fog so dense it was like driving through milk. The white lines on the asphalt were my only guide, hypnotic and endless. My eyes were burning from staring into the gloom, and that familiar, dangerous weariness was starting to set in. The kind where your mind starts playing tricks on you. You see shadows move in your periphery, mistake a mailbox for a person. I'd learned long ago to trust my mirrors but not my imagination. That's when I saw her. She was just a flicker at the edge of my high beams, a dark shape on the shoulder of the road. My first thought was annoyance. What in God's name was anyone doing out here in the middle of nowhere on a night like this? As I got closer, the shape resolved itself into the figure of a woman, an old woman. She was standing perfectly still, her back slightly stooped, wearing what looked like a simple dark dress that could have been from 100 years ago. A scarf was wrapped around her head, obscuring most of her face. She wasn't trying to flag me down. She was just standing there, a statue in the mist. My training, my instinct, everything screamed at me to keep going. You don't stop for anyone on these back roads at night. It's a lesson you learn on day one. But there was something about her that wasn't threatening. It was pitiful. An old woman, lost and alone. My foot eased off the accelerator, the air brakes hissing as I slowed the rig. I figured I could at least call it in, get the highway patrol to check on her. I rolled down my passenger window, ready to shout, to ask if she needed help. I was maybe 50 feet away when I passed her. I craned my neck, looking over my right shoulder, but the fog was so thick she was instantly swallowed by it. I glanced at my passenger side mirror, expecting to see her silhouette shrinking in the distance. There was nothing. Just the swirling gray fog and the faint red glow of my own taillights reflecting back at me. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I checked my rearview mirror, then the driver's side one. Nothing. It was impossible. Even in this fog, I should have seen her for a second or two. It was like she had simply ceased to exist the moment my cab passed her. Just the fog, Cal, I muttered to myself, my voice sounding hollow in the cab. Your eyes are playing tricks on you. I shook my head, trying to clear the image, and pressed down on the accelerator. The engine whined, but the truck felt sluggish, heavy. I pushed the pedal harder. Then it happened. The engine coughed, a violent sputtering sound that shook the whole rig. The lights on my dashboard flickered wildly, then died. The radio, which had been playing that mournful blues tune, cut out with a sharp crackle of static, plunging the cab into an unnerving silence. The only sound left was the hiss of the air brakes and the faint, ghostly whisper of my tires on the wet asphalt as the truck coasted to a stop. Damn it, I swore, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I tried the ignition. Nothing. The key turned, but the engine was dead. The battery was fine. The truck had been serviced last week. This made no sense. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the back of my neck. Being stranded is a trucker's worst nightmare. Being stranded in a fog-drowned swamp in the Mississippi Delta felt like the beginning of a horror story. I sat there for a moment, listening to my own ragged breathing. The silence was absolute, profound. The fog pressed in on the windows, isolating me, making the cab feel like a tiny, fragile bubble in a vast, empty void. I decided to give the ignition one more try before I got on the CB radio to call for help. I reached for the key, and that's when I felt it. A change in the air. The temperature in the cab dropped so suddenly that I saw my own breath plume in front of my face. And with the cold came a smell. It was a strange, cloying odor, a mix of damp, freshly turned earth, bitter herbs like crushed mullein, and something else. Something that smelled faintly of decay, like old flowers left on a grave. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I didn't want to look. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to keep my eyes fixed on the windshield, on the impenetrable wall of gray outside. But I couldn't stop myself. Slowly my head turned to the right. She was sitting in my passenger seat, the hoodoo woman. She was just as I'd seen her on the roadside, but now I could see her clearly in the faint ambient light that filtered through the fog. Her dress was made of rough, dark cotton. Her hands, gnarled and wrinkled like the roots of an old cypress tree, rested calmly in her lap. The scarf was still on her head, but I could see her face now. It was a mask of 1,000 tiny wrinkles, her skin the color of old parchment. But her eyes, dear God, her eyes. They were wide open, staring straight ahead at the road, but they were completely white, like two polished marbles of milk quartz. There were no pupils, no irises, just those flat, blind, luminous orbs. I was paralyzed. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. My entire world had shrunk to the space of that truck cab, to the silent, terrifying presence beside me. She never turned her head, never acknowledged me in any way. She just sat there, a silent passenger who had appeared from nowhere. The cold in the cab intensified, seeping into my bones. It felt like the cold of the grave. Time seemed to stretch and warp. A minute felt like an hour. I sat there, frozen in a state of pure, undiluted terror, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. It was a waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion and the hypnotic emptiness of the road. But the cold was real. The smell of damp earth was real. The silent, white-eyed woman in my passenger seat was terrifyingly, undeniably real. I don't know what broke the spell. Maybe it was some primal survival instinct kicking in. My hand, trembling uncontrollably, moved from the steering wheel and slammed down on the horn. The sudden, blaring noise shattered the silence, but it felt weak and pathetic against the profound stillness she had brought with her. She didn't flinch. Then a thought, clear and desperate, cut through my panic. Get out! My body moved without my permission. I fumbled with the door handle, my fingers clumsy and numb. The door swung open and I practically fell out of the cab, landing hard on the wet asphalt. I scrambled backward on my hands and feet, away from the truck, my eyes still locked on the passenger seat. She was still there, unmoving. I got to my feet and ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran blindly into the thick, cold fog, away from my truck, away from her. The air burned in my lungs. Branches from unseen trees whipped at my face. I stumbled through a ditch, mud and brackish water soaking my jeans. I kept running until my legs gave out and I collapsed, gasping for breath, my body shaking with a mixture of terror and exhaustion. I lay there in the wet grass on the side of the road for what felt like an eternity, listening. There was nothing, just the sound of my own frantic heartbeat and the chirping of crickets, a sound I hadn't even noticed before. The fog began to thin slightly, the moon a pale, blurry disk in the sky. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way back to the road. I could see my truck, a huge, dark shape about 100 yards away. The lights were on, not just the dim running lights, but the powerful high beams cutting two perfect, unwavering cones into the dissipating fog, and I could hear it. The low, steady, familiar rumble of my diesel engine. As I got closer, I saw the passenger door was closed. I circled the rig, my heart still pounding, and peered into the passenger side window. The seat was empty. The cab was empty. The air inside looked normal. The strange smell was gone. I climbed back into the driver's seat. The radio was playing again, the same blues station, a different song. The dashboard was lit up, all gauges normal. It was as if nothing had ever happened. I didn't sleep for 2 days. I drove straight to Vicksburg, dropped my load, and drove back to Memphis in broad daylight, never letting my speed drop below 70. When I finally got back, I went to a truck stop diner I knew, a place where the old-timers gathered. I found a driver named Earl, a man who'd been running the Delta Road since the 60s. I told him my story, expecting him to laugh at me. He didn't. He just stirred his coffee, his face grim. "You were lucky, son," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You saw the hoodoo woman. They say she's a spirit, a conjure woman from back in the day. She don't mean no harm most times. She just needs a ride. She tests you. If you panic, if you're disrespectful, she can lead you right off the road into the swamp. Or worse, she can curse your rig, make it so you're always breaking down, always losing money until you're ruined." He took a sip of his coffee. "You did the right thing by getting out. You showed respect for something you didn't understand. He told me to get a protective charm, a mojo bag, from a woman he knew in Greenville. I did. It's a small red flannel bag filled with herbs and roots and who knows what else. It's hung from my rearview mirror ever since. I still drive Highway 61, it's my job. But I never drive it at night if I can help it. And when I do, I keep my eyes on the road, I listen to the radio, and I never, ever look too closely at the shadows on the shoulder. Because I know she's still out there waiting in the fog. And I know that the Mississippi Delta holds secrets far older and deeper than the roads that cut through it." Did you enjoy this story? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video. And now, let's move on to our next story. My name is Tina Gardner. I'm what they call a reefer hauler, which means I spend my days and nights connected to a refrigerated trailer, carrying everything from frozen peas to fresh flowers all over the country. It's a solitary job, but I like it that way. I like the hum of the reefer unit, the open road, the feeling of being my own boss. I'm not the kind of person who scares easy. I've fended off lot lizards in Phoenix, changed a tire in a Wyoming blizzard, and stared down a state trooper who was sure my logbook was cooked. But nothing in my life prepared me for a hot, sticky night in Mississippi on a forgotten back road somewhere off Highway 49. I was on a tight schedule, hauling a load of premium ice cream from a plant in Texas to a distribution center in Atlanta. My GPS, usually my trusted co-pilot, had decided to have a meltdown. It kept rerouting me, sending me down a series of increasingly narrow and poorly maintained state highways. I was frustrated behind schedule and sweating in the thick, humid air that even my truck's AC couldn't seem to conquer. The Mississippi night was alive with the sound of cicadas, a deafening electric hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Finally, after another recalculating message, my GPS sent me down a 2-lane road so dark it felt like I was driving into a bucket of tar. The trees on either side were ancient oaks, their branches heavy with Spanish moss, forming a canopy that blocked out the moon and stars. It felt like driving through a tunnel carved out of the night itself. My headlights were the only proof that the world still existed. I was tired, my eyes gritty from staring into the darkness, and I was just about ready to pull over and wait for sunrise. That's when I saw the glow. Up ahead through the thick curtain of trees was a splash of color and light. It was a neon sign buzzing and flickering with a warm, inviting energy. The sign was a beautiful cursive script that read, "The Cypress Stump." Below it another sign blinked and read, "Live music." Cold beer. It was a juke joint. A real old-school, honest-to-God juke joint, seemingly in the middle of absolutely nowhere. The building itself was a ramshackle wooden structure, looking like it had been standing there for a century. There were a few old pickup trucks and a couple of classic-looking cars parked in the gravel lot out front. My first thought was relief. A place to stop, ask for directions, maybe grab a cold soda and splash some water on my face. It was a beacon of civilization in the oppressive darkness. I checked my mirrors, slowed my rig, and carefully maneuvered the big truck onto the wide shoulder across the road from the entrance. The sound of music, real music, drifted across the road. It wasn't coming from speakers, it was live. A wailing harmonica, a thumping upright bass, and a slide guitar that sounded like it was crying. It was the deepest, most soulful blues I had ever heard. I killed my engine, the sudden silence making the music seem even louder, more vibrant. I grabbed my wallet and my phone, hopped down from the cab, and walked across the asphalt. The air was thick with the smell of barbecue, stale beer, and something sweet like honeysuckle. As I got closer, I could see people inside through the screen door and the open, unscreened windows. They were dancing, laughing, drinking from long-neck bottles. It looked like a scene from another time. The men wore fedoras and suspenders. The women were in simple cotton dresses. Everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives. I pushed open the screen door, which creaked on its hinges, and stepped inside. The wave of sound and energy that hit me was incredible. The place was packed, every table full, people standing shoulder to shoulder. The band was on a small makeshift stage in the corner, 3 old men who looked as weathered as the building itself. The guitarist was playing a beat-up acoustic with a bottleneck slide on his finger, his eyes closed in concentration. The harmonica player's cheeks puffed out as he bent notes into impossible, mournful shapes. The air was hazy with cigarette smoke, and the wooden floorboards vibrated with the rhythm of the music and the stomp of dancing feet. I squeezed my way to the bar, a long plank of dark, scarred wood. The bartender was a large man with a kind, weary face. He nodded at me. "What can I get for you, little lady?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "Just a Coke, please," I said, shouting over the music. "And maybe some directions? My GPS is on the fritz and I think I'm lost." He chuckled, a deep rumbling sound. "GPS don't work out here," he said, sliding a sweating glass bottle of Coca-Cola across the bar to me. You're a long way from the main road. Where you headed? Atlanta, I told him. Well, you took a wrong turn somewhere, that's for sure, he said. Just keep on this road for another 5 miles. You'll hit a crossroads with a blinking yellow light. Take a left. That'll put you back on 49 North. I thanked him, feeling a wave of relief. The music was infectious, and despite my exhaustion, I found myself tapping my foot. The band finished their song to a roar of applause and whoops. I took a long drink of my Coke. It was the best I'd ever tasted, ice cold and sharp. I looked around the room, really taking in the scene. Everyone seemed so happy, so lost in the moment. There was a joy in that room that was pure and powerful. It felt real, more real than anything I'd experienced in a long time. I noticed a young woman sitting alone at a small table near the stage, nursing a beer. She had a sad, thoughtful look on her face. On a whim, I walked over. "Is this seat taken?" I asked. She looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "No, go ahead." "I'm Tina," I said, sitting down. "Sarah," she replied. "This place is amazing," I said. "The music. I've never heard anything like it." "They're the best," she said, her eyes drifting toward the stage. "They only play here. They say the music keeps the soul of this place alive." We talked for a bit. She was a local, she said. She came here whenever she felt lost, whenever she needed to feel connected to something. The band started up again, this time a slow, heart-wrenching ballad. A few couples got up to slow dance, swaying together in the smoky light. It was beautiful. I felt the tension and frustration of the last few hours just melting away, replaced by a strange sense of peace. I checked the time on my phone. I'd been there for nearly an hour. As much as I wanted to stay, I had a schedule to keep. I told Sarah it was nice to meet her, finished my Coke, and went to the bar to pay. "How much do I owe you?" I asked the bartender. He just smiled. "First one's on the house. For travelers who lose their way." He wiped the bar with a rag. "You be careful on that road now. It can be tricky at night." I thanked him again and made my way to the door. As I pushed it open, I turned back for one last look. The band was in full swing. The dancers were a swirl of motion, and the air was electric. It was a perfect, timeless moment. I walked back across the road to my truck, the sound of the wailing harmonica following me. I felt refreshed, my mood completely turned around. I climbed into the cab, fired up the engine, and pulled back onto the road, following the bartender's directions. The whole time, I couldn't stop smiling. I made a mental note to try and find the cypress stump again someday, maybe on a run where I had more time. About 5 miles down the road, just as the bartender had said, I came to a crossroads with a single blinking yellow traffic light. I took the left turn, and within minutes I saw the familiar green sign for Highway 49. I was back on track. A few weeks later, I was talking to another driver, an old-timer named George, on the CB radio. We were both heading through Mississippi, and I mentioned the amazing juke joint I'd found. "The cypress stump, you say?" he asked, his voice crackling over the radio. "Off 49? Little wooden place, neon sign?" "That's the one?" I said, excited that someone else knew it. "Best lived music I've ever heard." There was a long pause. The only sound was static. Then George's voice came back, and it was different, softer, spooked. "Tina, when did you say you saw this place?" "About 3 weeks ago," I said. "A Tuesday night. Why?" Another long silence. This time it was heavy, unsettling. "That's impossible," George finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "The cypress stump burned to the ground in 1988, took everyone inside with it, the band, the bartender, all the customers. There was a flash flood that year. The creek behind the place overflowed, knocked out the power lines. Started a fire. Nobody made it out. I went cold. Colder than the reefer unit humming behind me. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "No, you're wrong. I was there. I had a Coke. I talked to the bartender. I ain't wrong," George said, his voice firm. "My own cousin was the harmonica player in that band. Died in the fire. They never rebuilt the place. There's nothing out there now but a stone marker and a field of weeds. After I dropped my load in Atlanta, I couldn't shake it. I had to know. On my return trip, I took a detour. I found the same dark, forgotten road off Highway 49. I drove until I was sure I was in the right spot. There was no juke joint. There was no neon sign. There was just an empty, overgrown lot on the side of the road. My headlights cut across a field of tall grass and weeds. In the center of the lot, exactly where the building should have been, was a simple gray granite obelisk. I pulled over, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked over to it with a flashlight. It was a memorial. There were names carved into the stone, dozens of them, under a heading that read, "In loving memory of those who lost their lives at the Cypress Stump, August 9th, 1988. I scanned the names, my light trembling. I found the bartender's name. I found the names of the 3 men in the band. And then, near the bottom of the list, my breath caught in my throat and a sob escaped my lips. There it was, carved into the cold, hard stone. Sarah. I stumbled back to my truck and drove away as fast as I could. I never told anyone else that story. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I was in a place that shouldn't exist, listening to a band that had been dead for decades, talking to a ghost who was just as lost as I was. They say the blues comes from pain, from loss. Maybe that music was so powerful, so full of soul, that it just couldn't be silenced by something as simple as death. Maybe on certain nights when a traveler is lost and the air is heavy, the Cypress Stump opens its doors one more time, not for the living, but for the dead who just need one more song. My name is Lenny Price. I've been driving a flatbed for 30 years, hauling oversized loads, the kind of stuff that needs escort vehicles and special permits. I've moved everything from bridge girders to massive factory equipment. You learn a lot about patience in this line of work. You also learn about the road and how it can be a different world after the sun goes down. I'm a practical man. I believe in what I can see and touch, the grease on my hands, the weight of a steel chain, the solid rumble of my Peterbilt's engine. But one night, on a lonely stretch of road bordering the endless cotton fields of the Mississippi Delta, I saw something that I can't explain, something that shook my practical world to its very foundation. It was a clear, cool night in early autumn. The harvest was in full swing, and the fields I was passing were stark white under the light of a brilliant full moon. It was beautiful, in a stark, desolate kind of way. I was hauling a gigantic turbine housing, a wide load that had me taking up nearly a lane and a half. My route had taken me off the main interstate and onto a series of smaller state highways to avoid low overpasses. I was crawling along at about 45 miles per hour, my yellow caution lights flashing, painting the fields in rhythmic strobing bursts of light. The road was dead straight and flat, stretching to the horizon. I hadn't seen another vehicle for the better part of an hour. It was just me, the moon, and the cotton. The silence was profound, broken only by the thrum of my engine and the faint whistle of the wind over my wide load. It was the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the last person on earth. I first saw them in my rearview mirror, a set of headlights far in the distance. Then another pair, and another. Within a minute, there were at least a dozen pairs of headlights behind me, arranged in a neat, orderly line. My first feeling was a surge of irritation, a convoy. Probably the military, or maybe a bunch of other truckers who'd gotten routed the same way. Either way, passing me was going to be a slow, frustrating process for them, and their presence meant I had to be extra vigilant. I kept my eyes on my mirrors, watching them get closer. They were moving at a steady pace, matching my speed. What was strange was the trucks themselves. As they drew nearer, I could make out their shapes in the moonlight. They weren't modern rigs. They were old, the kind you see in black and white photos from the 40s or 50s. They had rounded fenders, tall, narrow grills, and single round headlights. They looked like a fleet of antique army trucks, maybe old Diamond T's or GMC's from the Korean War era. Must be a classic truck club out for a midnight run, I thought to myself, trying to rationalize it. It was odd, but not impossible. The lead truck pulled out into the oncoming lane to pass me. I hugged the shoulder as tight as I could, giving him plenty of room. As the truck drew alongside my cab, I glanced over, ready to give the driver a friendly nod. The driver's seat was empty. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, a reflection on the glass. I stared harder. The cab of the old truck was dark, but I could see the steering wheel clearly in the moonlight. There was no one behind it. No hands on the wheel, no silhouette in the seat. The truck moved with a smooth, unwavering purpose, its engine making a sound I couldn't quite hear. That was the other thing. The sound. My own engine was a deafening roar in my ears, but as this phantom truck passed me, I should have heard the groan of its old diesel engine, the rumble of its tires on the pavement. There was nothing. It moved in absolute, complete silence. It was like watching a movie with the sound turned off. One by one, the entire convoy began to pass me. A long line of ancient driverless trucks gliding past my window like ghosts. I counted them, 12 in total. All of them were the same model, a drab olive green, their flatbeds empty. And in every single one, the cab was vacant. They moved in perfect formation, maintaining an exact distance from one another, their silent procession an affront to all logic and reason. My blood ran cold. The hairs on my arms stood on end. My practical, logical world was crumbling. This wasn't a truck club. This wasn't real. I was seeing something impossible, something that shouldn't be. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I wanted to slam on the brakes, to get out and run, but I was pinned in by my own oversized load, a prisoner in my own cab. All I could do was watch. As the last truck in the silent convoy passed me, it did something that terrified me more than anything else. It swerved back into my lane directly in front of me, so close I had to stomp on my brakes to avoid hitting it. The air brakes shrieked and my rig shuddered as it slowed. The 12 phantom trucks were now directly in front of me, a perfect ghostly convoy leading the way down the moonlit highway. They held their speed, just a little faster than I was going, slowly pulling away. But they didn't just drive down the road. As they approached a large open gate leading into one of the vast cotton fields, the lead truck turned. Without slowing down, it drove off the asphalt and into the field, its tires leaving no tracks on the soft earth. The other 11 trucks followed it, one after the other, a silent, orderly procession into the sea of white cotton. I had my rig slowed to a crawl now, my eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. I watched as the entire convoy drove deep into the field. They didn't stop. They just kept going, their forms growing fainter and more translucent the farther they went. It was like they were dissolving into the moonlight, their solid shapes becoming ethereal and transparent. Within seconds, the last truck had faded completely and they were gone. Vanished. The road ahead of me was empty. The field was pristine and undisturbed, a blanket of white under the moon with no sign that a dozen heavy trucks had just driven across it. The world was silent again, except for the ragged sound of my own breathing and the idling rumble of my engine. I pulled my rig over to the shoulder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I killed the engine and just sat there in the sudden deafening silence, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. I got out of the cab, my legs feeling weak and unsteady. I walked to the edge of the field where they had turned in. There were no tire tracks, no broken cotton plants, nothing. It was as if they had never been there at all. I stayed there for a long time until the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. I didn't know what else to do. When the sun was finally up, I got back in my truck and drove the rest of the way to my destination in a daze. I tried to find an explanation. I searched online for military bases in the area, for stories of old army convoys, for anything. I found nothing. Then I stumbled upon a local history forum for the Mississippi Delta. I posted a vague question about ghost stories involving old trucks near the cotton fields. An old woman, a local historian, replied. She told me a story. During World War II, there was a small temporary training base in that area. One night, a convoy of 12 trucks filled with young soldiers, boys from all over the country, was heading out on a training exercise. A sudden freak storm rolled in, the kind the Delta is famous for. A tornado dropped out of the sky without warning and hit the convoy head-on. All 12 trucks and all the men inside were lost. They searched for days, but the wreckage and the bodies were scattered so far and wide across the fields that they never found them all. She said that ever since, on certain clear moonlit nights during the harvest season, people have seen them. The phantom convoy. They say the soldiers are still trying to complete their final training exercise, forever driving their silent trucks through the cotton fields where they died, still reporting for a duty that ended 70 years ago. I'm a practical man. I still believe in grease and steel and the laws of physics, but I also believe what I saw. I saw a dozen ghosts driving their phantom trucks into a field of cotton under a full moon. I don't drive that stretch of road at night anymore. Some things you only need to see once, and some things once seen can never be forgotten. The road holds a lot of stories, but some of them are not for the living to understand. My name is Sharon Ellis. I'm a car hauler. It's a specialized gig, and I'm one of the few women in my company who does it. I love the challenge, the precision it takes to load $1 million worth of luxury cars onto a double-decker trailer and haul them safely across the country. My job often takes me along the Gulf Coast through the humid, salt-laced air of Mississippi's southern edge. I'm used to the strange beauty of the coastal marshes and the sudden, violent thunderstorms that boil up from the Gulf. I thought I knew the sounds of the coast, the cry of gulls, the whisper of the tide, the rustle of marsh grass. But one night near the Pascagoula River, I heard a sound that wasn't from this world, a sound that has haunted my quiet moments ever since. I was on the final leg of a long trip, bringing a load of brand new Cadillacs from a plant in Michigan down to a dealership in Biloxi. It was late, well past midnight, and I was tired. I was on I-10, the big interstate that skirts the coast, but a major accident ahead had traffic backed up for miles. My dispatcher, knowing I was on a tight schedule, gave me a detour onto US Highway 90, the old coastal road that runs parallel to the interstate. Highway 90 is a different world. It's a slower, older road that winds through the small coastal towns and over the wide, dark rivers that empty into the Gulf. That night, the air was incredibly still and heavy, and a thick sea fog was rolling in, blanketing the road in a soft, disorienting haze. The fog muffled all sound, creating an eerie, profound silence broken only by the low hum of my engine. I was approaching the bridge that crosses the Pascagoula River. It's a massive, sprawling waterway, more of a bay than a river at this point, where the fresh water of the river meets the salt water of the Gulf. The fog was so dense over the water that as I drove onto the bridge, it felt like I was driving off the edge of the world onto a road suspended in a cloud. I couldn't see the water below or the sky above, just the concrete barrier of the bridge and the ghostly glow of the streetlights reflecting off the mist. It was on the bridge that I first heard it. It was faint at first, a soft, melodic sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I thought it was my radio, maybe a station fading in and out, so I reached over and turned it off. The sound remained. It was music, but like no music I had ever heard. It was a chorus of voices humming a strange, mournful, and incredibly beautiful melody. There were no words, just a layered, harmonious humming that rose and fell like the tide. It was a sound so pure and sad it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I slowed the truck, rolling down my window. The thick, damp air rolled in, carrying the sound with it, making it clearer, louder. It was definitely coming from the river, rising up from the dark, fog-shrouded water below. It was dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all humming the same haunting tune. It was beautiful, but it was also deeply, profoundly wrong. There should not be a choir singing in the middle of a river at 2 a.m. I stopped my rig right there, in the middle of the deserted bridge. I put on my hazards and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, the music was all-encompassing. It filled the air, a symphony of sorrow that seemed to vibrate in my bones. It was the saddest sound I had ever heard, a sound of immense loss, of a deep, unending grief. I felt tears welling up, in my eyes, though I didn't know why. The music was pulling an emotion out of me that wasn't my own. I got out of my cab and walked to the edge of the bridge, peering down into the impenetrable fog below. I couldn't see anything, just the swirling gray mist. But the music was rising from it, as if the river itself was singing. I stood there, mesmerized for what felt like a long time, just listening to this impossible, heartbreaking chorus. Then I started to see them. Faint, shimmering lights began to appear in the fog below me. They were small, pale, bluish-white lights like will-o'-the-wisps. They drifted and swayed in time with the music, moving just above the unseen surface of the water. There were dozens of them, then hundreds, a constellation of ghostly lights dancing in the mist. As I watched, they began to coalesce, their forms becoming clearer. They weren't just lights, they were figures. The translucent, shimmering shapes of people. Men, women, and children, all with their heads tilted back as if in song, their forms made of nothing but pale, ethereal light. They drifted on the currents of the fog, their ghostly bodies swaying to the rhythm of their own mournful tune. I was paralyzed, a spectator to a spectral concert. The sight was terrifyingly beautiful. I wasn't scared in a way that made me want to run. I was held captive by the sheer, overwhelming sadness and beauty of the moment. I felt like I was witnessing something ancient, a ritual that had been performed on this river for centuries. I don't know how long I stood there. Time seemed to have stopped. It was a young man's voice that broke the spell. "You hear 'em, don't you?" I gasped and spun around. A local police car had pulled up silently behind my truck, its lights off. A young officer was leaning against his vehicle, his arms crossed, his face calm and knowing. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. "The singing river," he said, his voice soft, not wanting to disturb the music. "That's what the locals call it. Been happening for as long as anyone can remember." He told me the legend, a story passed down from the Biloxi tribe who first lived on this land. The story of a peaceful tribe who were so in love with their home on the river that they could not bear to be conquered by a stronger, more warlike tribe. Rather than become slaves, the entire tribe, every man, woman, and child, walked hand in hand into the river, singing their death song as the water closed over their heads. They chose to join their spirits with the river they loved rather than live without freedom. They say on still, quiet nights you can still hear them, the officer said, his eyes on the fog-shrouded water. "Still singing their song. Some folks think it's just the wind or the sound of the gas bubbling up from the riverbed. But we know what it is." He looked at me. "They don't show themselves to everyone. You must have a quiet heart for them to let you see them." As he spoke, the music began to fade, the volume slowly decreasing as if a conductor were bringing the piece to a close. The shimmering figures in the fog grew dimmer, their light receding, until they dissolved back into the mist. Within a minute, the music was gone, and the river was silent once more, the only sound the distant lapping of water against the bridge pylons. "Show's over for tonight," the officer said with a sad smile. "You should probably get moving before the fog gets any thicker." I got back in my truck, my mind reeling. I had heard and seen a legend. I had been an audience to a ghostly choir of souls lost to history, their grief and love for their home so strong that it still echoed through the centuries. I drove off the bridge and continued on my way to Biloxi, the haunting melody forever imprinted on my memory. I'm not a spiritual person. I believe in diesel, steel, and the solid road. But I know what I heard that night. I heard the soul of a people, a song of sorrow so profound it has stained the very water and air of the place where they died. The Mississippi Delta is full of stories, but along the coast, the stories aren't just told. They're sung. And if you're ever crossing the Pascagoula River on a quiet, foggy night, and you hear a strange, beautiful music rising from the water, pull over. Be still. And listen. You might just hear the river sing. My name is Robert Hayes. I've been a trucker for over 20 years, hauling produce up and down the country. It's a life of solitude, spent mostly in the dark, chasing deadlines from one coast to the other. I'm a practical man, not given to flights of fancy. I've seen enough real-world horrors on the highway. The aftermath of terrible accidents, the desperation of people stranded and broken, to have much time for the supernatural. But the Mississippi Delta is a place steeped in legend, and one night, at a lonely, forgotten crossroads, I had an encounter that I can't explain away. An encounter that makes me wonder about the old stories, the ones about deals made in the dark. I was on a run from California to Georgia, carrying a load of lettuce that needed to stay cold and get to its destination fast. I was cutting across the Delta on Highway 61, the legendary Blues Highway. It was a hot, sticky summer night, the kind where the air is so thick you can feel it on your skin. The moon was a thin silver crescent, providing little light. I was tired, pushing the limits of my logbook, my eyes gritty from staring at the endless ribbon of asphalt. My trouble started when my reefer unit, the big refrigeration unit on the front of my trailer, started acting up. The temperature was fluctuating, a death sentence for a load of fresh produce. I needed to get it looked at, and fast. I knew there was a 24-hour Thermo King service center in Clarksdale, a town famous for its blues history. I pulled off the main highway, following the signs into town. Clarksdale at 1 a.m. is a ghost town. The streets were empty, the historic buildings dark and silent. My GPS led me to the address for the service center, but it was closed. A handwritten sign on the door saying they had suspended their 24-hour service. I swore under my breath. I was in a real bind. Every minute that passed, my load was getting warmer, my profit margin shrinking. I was about to head back to the highway and try my luck in the next big town when I saw him. He was standing at an intersection a few blocks away. It was a simple four-way stop, nothing remarkable about it except that it was the intersection of two dirt roads that crossed the main paved street. A crossroads. He was a tall, slender man silhouetted under a single flickering streetlight. He was just standing there, not looking at his phone, not waiting for a ride, just standing, Desperate, I drove up to him and rolled down my window. "Excuse me," I called out. "You from around here?" The man turned. He was dressed impeccably in a dark tailored suit which was bizarre for the time of night and the oppressive heat. He looked to be in his 50s with sharp, intelligent features and skin the color of rich, dark coffee. But it was his eyes that got me. They were dark and piercing, and they seemed to hold a strange, amused twinkle, as if he knew a joke that the rest of the world wasn't in on. "I am," he said, his voice smooth as velvet with a cultured, almost theatrical accent. "You seem to be in a spot of trouble, my friend." "You could say that," I said, gesturing back at my trailer. "My reefer unit is on the fritz and the service center is closed. You wouldn't happen to know another mechanic around here, would you?" The man smiled, a slow, wide smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know a little about engines," he said. "Perhaps I can be of assistance." I was hesitant. He didn't look like any mechanic I'd ever met, but I was desperate. "All right," I said. "Hop in." He walked around to the passenger side and climbed into the cab. He moved with a strange, effortless grace. He didn't ask my name, and I didn't ask his. He just settled into the seat as if he belonged there. "Let's have a look," he said. I took him to a nearby parking lot, and he got out and went to work. He didn't have any tools, not that I could see. He just opened the service panel on the reefer unit and stood there for a moment, his head cocked as if he were listening to it. He placed a hand on the engine, his long, elegant fingers tracing the lines of the machinery. He hummed a low, bluesy tune under his breath. After a minute, he closed the panel. "Try it now," he said, his smile unwavering. I went back to the cab and flipped the switch for the reefer. The engine, which had been sputtering and stalling, roared to life with a smooth, powerful, perfect hum. I checked the thermostat. The temperature was already dropping, the cool air blasting from the vents. I was stunned. "How did you do that?" I asked, walking back to him. "What was wrong with it?" "Just a loose connection," he said dismissively, wiping his perfectly clean hands on a silk handkerchief. "It needed a more personal touch." I was flooded with relief. He had saved my load, saved my job. "I don't know how to thank you," I said, pulling out my wallet. "What do I owe you?" He held up a hand, stopping me. "No payment is necessary," he said, his dark eyes glinting. "Let's just call it a professional courtesy." He paused, his gaze intense. "But perhaps you could do something for me." "Anything," I said, meaning it. "I find myself in need of a ride," he said. "Just a little ways down the road. There's a turnoff a few miles south of here. Drop me there and we'll call it even." It was the least I could do. "Of course," I said. "Hop in." We drove out of Clarksdale back onto the dark ribbon of Highway 61. The man was a fascinating conversationalist. He talked about music, about the history of the Delta, about the nature of desire and ambition. He spoke like a philosopher, his words weaving a strange, hypnotic spell. He seemed to know everything, not just about the world, but about me. He mentioned the town I grew up in, the name of the first girl I ever kissed, my secret ambition to one day own my own fleet of trucks. I was so captivated by his conversation that I never thought to ask how he knew these things. "This is it," he said suddenly, pointing ahead. It wasn't a town or a truck stop. It was just another dirt crossroads, identical to the one where I'd found him, marked by a single ancient-looking oak tree. I pulled the truck over. "Here?" I asked, confused. "There's nothing here." "This is my stop," he said, his smile returning. He opened the door and stepped out, turning to face me one last time. The moonlight hit his face, and for a split second I thought I saw his eyes flash a deep, fiery red. "Thank you for the ride, Robert," he said, using my name for the first time. "You're a man with big dreams. I have a feeling you're going to get everything you want." You've got the drive for it. Just be careful what you wish for. There's always a price." And with that, he turned and walked to the center of the crossroads. He didn't walk down one of the dirt roads, he just stood there at the precise point where the two paths crossed. And then, he was gone. He didn't fade or dissolve. One moment he was there, and the next the spot was empty. It was as if the night had just swallowed him whole. I sat there, my blood frozen in my veins, the man's final words echoing in my ears. I finally managed to put the truck in gear and sped away, my heart hammering against my ribs. The rest of the trip was uneventful. My reefer ran perfectly. I delivered the load on time, but my life changed after that night. Things started to go my way. I got a promotion, then another. I saved up enough money to buy my own truck, then a second, then a third. Within 5 years, I had my own small fleet, just like I had always dreamed. I had everything I wanted, but there was a price. My marriage fell apart. I lost touch with my kids. I have money, I have success, but I'm more alone now than I ever was when I was just a company driver. My life is empty, the joy gone out of it, replaced by a constant gnawing ambition for more. I know who I met that night. The Delta is full of stories about him. They say that if you go to a crossroads at midnight and you have a desire in your heart, a want so powerful it hurts, he might just show up. He's a musician, a mechanic, a philosopher, a businessman. He's whatever you need him to be. And he'll give you what you want. He doesn't ask for your soul, not in the old-fashioned way. He just makes a small adjustment, a personal touch. He fixes the loose connection in your engine or in your life, and in return he takes something small. Your joy, your peace, your capacity for love. I made a deal that night, a deal I didn't even know I was making. I didn't trade my soul for success. I think somehow I traded it for a working refrigeration unit. And now, when I drive the dark highways of the Delta, I don't stop at crossroads. I just drive on, the king of my lonely, successful world, forever paying the price. If this story chilled you, don't forget to like and comment below. Now let's continue with another terrifying tale. My name is Angela Morton. I've been driving for a little over 15 years now, mostly dry van work, crisscrossing the country with loads of everything from paper towels to electronics. I'm good at my job because I'm meticulous. I plan my routes down to the last mile, I watch my hours like a hawk, and I trust my instruments. My truck is my kingdom, and in it, I am in complete control. That's what I used to believe anyway. I used to think that with enough planning and enough common sense, you could navigate anything the road threw at you. But the road has its own rules, especially in a place like the Mississippi Delta, where the water runs deep and the past never quite settles. One night on a forgotten county road, I learned that some routes don't show up on any map, and some bridges are built from something other than steel and concrete. This particular run was supposed to be simple. I was hauling a full load from Shreveport, Louisiana to a distribution center just outside of Jackson, Mississippi. It was a route I'd done a dozen times before. But that summer had been brutal, with a series of thunderstorms that had washed out roads and bridges all over the region. My usual route on I-20 had a major closure due to a flash flood, forcing me and every other trucker onto a long, winding detour through the heart of the Delta. The detour took me off the clean, well-lit interstate and plunged me into a world of two-lane blacktop, cracked and buckled by the relentless summer heat. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the world a thick, inky black, broken only by the sweep of my headlights. I was deep in Yazoo County, a place named for the river that snakes through it like a muddy serpent. The air was so thick with humidity it felt like I was breathing water, and the night was alive with the thrumming chorus of a million insects. It's a lonely, intimidating landscape at night. The trees, heavy with Spanish moss, crowd the edges of the road, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for your truck. My GPS, usually a reliable companion, was struggling. The signal kept dropping, the map pixelating into a useless gray square before snapping back into focus, showing my little truck icon crawling through a vast featureless green. I was relying on old-fashioned road signs which were few and far between and often rusted and illegible. I was tired, my shoulders aching from the tension of navigating the narrow, unfamiliar road. All I wanted was to get back to the interstate, back to the familiar world of bright lights and wide, straight lanes. I came around a sharp bend, my headlights cutting through the darkness, and saw it. A bridge. It wasn't a large, modern concrete structure. This was an old bridge, a relic from another era. It was a single-lane truss bridge, its steel framework a complex web of black girders and rivets, rusted to a deep, dark brown. It spanned a wide, slow-moving river that had to be the Yazoo. A weathered, barely readable sign at its entrance said Yazoo River, and below it another sign warned 1-lane bridge and 5-ton limit. I stopped the truck, the air brakes hissing in the quiet night. 5-ton limit. My rig with its full load was pushing 40 tons. This was a hard stop I couldn't cross. I let out a long, frustrated sigh, the sound swallowed by the chirping of the crickets. I put the truck in park and pulled out my paper road atlas, the last resort of a lost trucker. Spreading it out under the dim glow of my cab light, I tried to find my location. According to the atlas, there should have been a newer concrete bridge about 2 miles south of here. This old truss bridge wasn't even on the map. It was a ghost. Frustrated, I decided to get out and stretch my legs to clear my head and figure out a plan. Maybe I could find a place to turn the rig around, backtrack, and find the proper crossing. I opened the door and stepped out into the soupy, warm night. The sound of the insects was deafening. The air smelled of mud, decaying leaves, and the metallic tang of the river. I walked to the edge of the road, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder, and looked at the bridge. It was a beautiful, haunting structure in the moonlight. It looked strong, solid, a testament to an older, more deliberate kind of engineering. The 5-ton limit seemed overly cautious. It looked like it could hold a train. As I stood there, a strange feeling washed over me, a sense of peace. The frustration and anxiety I'd been feeling began to ebb away, replaced by a calm, almost dreamlike state. The sound of the crickets seemed to fade and the air grew still. I looked back at my truck, its lights cutting a sterile yellow path through the organic darkness. Then I looked back at the bridge. It seemed to be inviting me. The thought was absurd, but I couldn't shake it. It felt like the right way to go, the only way. My mind, usually so sharp and logical, felt fuzzy, clouded. The 5-ton limit, the unmapped location, my professional judgment, it all seemed unimportant, distant. The only thing that mattered was crossing that bridge. I walked back to my truck, my movements feeling slow and deliberate, as if I were moving through water. I climbed back into the cab, the familiar feel of the seat and the steering wheel doing little to ground me. I looked at the bridge again. It was waiting. I put the truck in gear, my foot pressing the accelerator. The engine rumbled, and the big rig began to creep forward onto the wooden planks of the bridge deck. The sound of the tires on the wood was a low, hollow thudding, a drumbeat that echoed out over the dark water. The steel trusses rose up around me, caging me in, the patterns of moonlight and shadow playing across my windshield like a strange, hypnotic film. The bridge was longer than it looked. It felt like I was driving for minutes, the same rhythmic thudding of the planks the only sound in the world. I looked out my side window at the river below. The water was black and still as glass, reflecting the moon with a perfect, unnerving clarity. I should have been terrified. The bridge should have been groaning and creaking under the immense weight of my truck. But there was no sound of protest, no strain. It felt as solid as a mountain. The sense of peace deepened, a profound and unnatural calm that settled into my very bones. I felt like I could drive on this bridge forever. Then I was across. The tires hit solid asphalt with a soft bump, and I was back on the two-lane road. I looked in my rearview mirror, expecting to see the intricate steel skeleton of the bridge receding behind me. There was nothing there, just the wide, black, unbroken river shimmering in the moonlight. The bridge was gone. I slammed on the brakes, my heart suddenly exploding in my chest as the strange, peaceful fog in my mind evaporated, replaced by a jolt of pure, ice-cold adrenaline. I stared into the mirror, my mind screaming. It was impossible. I had just crossed it. I had felt the wooden planks under my wheels. I had seen the steel trusses pass by my window. I threw the truck into park, my hands shaking violently. I jumped out of the cab and ran to the riverbank. The road just ended. It crumbled away into mud and reeds at the water's edge. There was no bridge. There was no sign of a bridge. No pylons in the water, no abutments on the bank. It was as if it had never existed. Panic seized me. I was on the wrong side of the river, with no bridge behind me and no idea what lay ahead. I looked at my GPS. The screen was still gray. I was well and truly lost, trapped by a river and a phantom. I started to hyperventilate, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. I leaned against my truck, trying to get a grip, trying to force my logical mind to work. Had I fallen asleep? Had I dreamed the whole thing? But I was here on the other side. The truck was here. It was real. After what felt like an hour of just standing there, shaking in the dark, I forced myself to make a decision. I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving. I got back in the truck, my body trembling, and started driving, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of civilization. About a mile down the road, my headlights picked up a sign. It was new and reflective. It read State Highway 16, 1 mile. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me weep washed over me. I was saved. I was near a real mapped road. The next morning I was at a truck stop in Jackson drinking the worst coffee I'd ever tasted, but feeling like it was the nectar of the gods. I was still shaken, but the bright morning sun and the familiar rumble of other trucks helped to push the memory of the night into the realm of a bad dream. I was talking to an old-timer, a driver who had been running these parts of Mississippi his whole life. I told him about the detour, about getting lost. I didn't tell him about the bridge. I didn't want him to think I was crazy. I just said, I ended up on some old county road by the Yazoo River. I thought I was going to be stuck out there all night. He nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You gotta be careful on them old roads, he said, especially by the river. That water holds a lot of memories. My granddaddy used to tell me a story about a bridge out that way. An old steel bridge built back in the 20s. My blood went cold. I leaned forward, my coffee forgotten. What happened to it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It was the spring of '53, he said, his voice taking on the cadence of a well-told tale. There was a big flood. The river was raging, tearing up everything in its path. A school bus was trying to get across that old bridge filled with kids heading home. The bridge couldn't take the strain of the floodwaters. It collapsed. The whole thing, the bus, the driver, all those children went straight into the Yazoo. They never recovered any of them. The river just swallowed them whole. He took a long sip of his coffee, his eyes distant. They never rebuilt it, said the spot was cursed. But folks who get lost out there at night, they say that sometimes the bridge comes back. They say it's the spirits of those children. trying to help lost travelers get to the other side, trying to complete the journey they never could. They say it only appears to those who are truly lost and don't have any other way to go. And once you're across, it disappears, because it was never really there at all. I just sat there, my mind reeling, the trucker's words echoing the hollow thud of my tires on the wooden planks. I had been lost, I had been desperate, and some ghostly echo of a long-forgotten tragedy, had reached out across time and space to help me. I had crossed a bridge of memory, a structure held together by loss and a lingering sense of duty. I still drive, but I stick to the interstates now, no matter how long the detour. I trust my GPS, but I also know that there are older, stranger maps overlaid on the world, maps drawn by ghosts. And I know that sometimes when you're lost in the deep, dark heart of the country, the only way forward is to trust in a bridge that isn't there. My name is Jerome Carter. I'm a tanker yanker, been one for over 20 years. I haul fuel, gasoline, diesel, ethanol. If it's flammable and liquid, I've probably hauled it. It's a job that demands your full attention. You're driving a rolling bomb and there's no room for error, no room for your mind to wander. You learn to be hyper-aware of your surroundings, to notice every little detail on the road. That's why I know what I saw that night wasn't a trick of the light or a product of a tired mind. When you're trained to see everything, you can't unsee something that doesn't belong. And the little boy I saw walking on that levee road in the Mississippi Delta, he didn't belong. The run was a routine one, a milk run as we call it. I was taking a load of diesel from the refinery in Baton Rouge up to a depot in Memphis. To save some time and avoid the traffic on I-55, I often cut through the Delta on US 61. But on this particular night, there was a bad wreck up ahead, a multi-car pileup that had the highway shut down for miles. My dispatcher got on the radio and gave me a detour, a series of state and county roads that would snake along the Mississippi River itself, bypassing the mess. These were not roads meant for a big rig, especially not a fully loaded tanker. They were narrow, unlit, and flanked on one side by dense dark woods and on the other by the massive grassy slope of the Mississippi River levee. The levee was a constant presence, a huge man-made mountain of earth that held back the most powerful river in North America. It was an unnerving feeling driving alongside it in the dark. You could feel the immense weight of the water on the other side, a sleeping giant that could awaken at any moment. The night was clear and moonless, the kind of deep, rural dark where the stars look like holes punched in a black velvet curtain. My headlights were the only source of light for miles, carving a tunnel through the oppressive blackness. The road was rough and I was taking it slow, the liquid in my tank sloshing with a heavy rhythmic surge that I could feel through the whole truck. It was well after 2 a.m., that dead, silent hour when the world seems to be holding its breath. I was concentrating on the road, my eyes scanning for potholes and stray animals, when a flicker of movement on top of the levee caught my eye. I glanced up. There was a figure up there walking along the crest of the earthen wall. It was a child, a little boy. My heart jumped into my throat. What on earth was a kid doing out here in the middle of the night, miles from any town? He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. He was wearing what looked like old-fashioned overalls and a simple, light-colored shirt. He was just walking, his pace steady and unhurried, his small silhouette stark against the star-dusted sky. My first instinct was that he was in trouble. He was lost, or he'd run away. I had to help. I slowed the big truck to a crawl, the air brakes hissing, and rolled down my window, leaning my head out into the humid night air. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice sounding loud and harsh in the stillness. "Hey, kid! You all right?" The boy didn't stop walking. He didn't turn his head. He didn't seem to hear me at all. It was like I wasn't even there. kid?" I shouted again, louder this time. "Do you need help?" I brought the truck to a complete stop, its engine rumbling, its lights painting the side of the levee in a bright white glare. The boy was directly illuminated now, and what I saw made the blood in my veins turn to ice. He was pale. Not just a little pale like a kid who stays indoors too much. He was unnaturally, luminously pale, his skin the color of bone china. It seemed to almost glow in my headlights, a stark, ghostly white against the dark grass of the levee. His hair was a shock of white blonde, and his clothes, which I could now see were tattered and worn, also seemed drained of all color. He was a monochrome figure in a world of muted greens and browns. He was still walking, his bare feet moving silently over the grass. But it was his face that truly terrified me. As he drew parallel to my truck, he finally turned his head and looked down at me. His face was thin and gaunt, his expression utterly blank, devoid of any emotion. But his eyes were black pits. There were no whites, no irises, just two deep, dark, empty sockets that seemed to drink the light from my headlamps. It was like looking into the eyes of a porcelain doll that had been left in a fire. I was frozen, my hand still on the steering wheel, my mouth hanging open. The sight of him was so profoundly wrong, so utterly alien, that my brain simply refused to process it. This was not a living child. This was something else. Something ancient and terrible, wearing the shape of a little boy. He held my gaze for a long, silent moment, and in that moment, I felt a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was a deep, internal cold, a feeling of absolute soul-crushing despair. It was the feeling of utter loneliness, of being lost in the dark for an eternity. It wasn't my feeling, it was his. He was projecting it into me, sharing his endless, desolate existence. Then he just turned his head away and kept walking, his pace never faltering. He continued along the top of the levee, his pale form growing smaller and smaller as he moved out of the main beam of my headlights. I watched, paralyzed, as his glowing white shape finally faded into the darkness, disappearing as if he had simply dissolved into the night. For a full minute I just sat there in my idling truck, the image of his black eyes burned into my mind. The profound sense of sorrow and hopelessness lingered in the cab like a foul odor. I finally managed to get my shaking hands to work, putting the truck in gear and pulling away, much faster than was safe on that narrow road. I didn't care. I just had to put as much distance as possible between me and that spot on the levee. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up, and even then I pulled into the first brightly lit, crowded truck stop I could find. I sat in the diner, surrounded by the clatter of plates and the chatter of other drivers, and drank coffee after coffee, trying to chase away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. Later that day, I called my dispatcher to tell him I was back on the main route. I mentioned the detour and the creepy road along the levee. "Oh, you took the old river road," he said. "Yeah, that's a spooky one. Locals don't like to drive it at night." "Why's that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Old stories," he said. "Ghost stories. You know how it is in the Delta. Every road has its haunt. They say that road is walked by the ghost of a little boy." My hand tightened on the phone. "A little boy?" "Yeah," the dispatcher continued, oblivious to my reaction. "The story goes that back during the Great Flood of 1927, the levee broke right around there. The water came through with the force of a tidal wave, wiping out everything. There was a small sharecropper's cabin right near the road. The whole family was swept away. They never found the body of their youngest son. They say he's still out there, walking the levee, looking for his home, looking for his family. They call him the Levee Walker, or sometimes the Pale Child." I hung up the phone, my whole body trembling. It wasn't a story. I had seen him. I had looked into his empty eyes and felt a piece of his eternal watery grave. The Great Flood of 1927. That child had been walking that same lonely path for almost 100 years. Trapped in a loop of loss and confusion, his ghost forever tied to the man-made hill that had failed to protect him. I've been a trucker for a long time. I've seen the loneliness of the road. But that night I learned that there are different kinds of loneliness. There's the kind you feel when you're 1,000 miles from home, and then there's the kind that a lost soul feels when home doesn't exist anymore. I still drive the Delta, but I never take the river road, not even in the daytime. And sometimes when I'm driving at night and I see a flicker of movement in the distance, I feel a pang of that same cold despair, and I say a little prayer for the pale child, forever walking the levee in the dark. My name is Martha Lee, and I'm an independent owner-operator. That means the truck I drive is my own, my business is my own, and my time is my own. I've been doing this for about 10 years, ever since I was 22. I love the freedom of it, the solitude. But when you're a woman out here on your own, you learn to be careful. You develop a sixth sense for trouble. You learn which truck stops are safe and which ones to avoid, which dark corners of a parking lot are best left empty. My instincts have kept me safe from the living for a decade. I never imagined I'd need them to protect me from the dead. I was hauling a load of lumber from Oregon to Florida, a long, grueling cross-country trip. I was pushing through Mississippi, trying to make up for some time I'd lost in a storm in Texas. It was late, probably around 1 a.m., and I was getting hit with a wave of exhaustion so powerful it felt like a physical blow. My eyelids felt like they had weights on them, and the white lines on the highway were starting to blur together. I knew I had to pull over. Pushing through fatigue is how accidents happen. I was on a dark, rural stretch of Interstate 55 south of Grenada. I saw a sign coming up, "Rest area 2 miles." It was a godsend. I didn't need fuel or food, just a safe, well-lit place to park my rig and get a few hours of sleep. The big chain truck stops are great, but sometimes a quiet, simple rest area is all you need. I pulled off the interstate and followed the ramp to the rest area. It was an older one, you could tell. The architecture was that dated 70s-era concrete block style. There were separate lots for cars and trucks. The car lot was completely empty. The truck lot had about a dozen spots, and only one other truck was parked there, way at the far end, its engine off, its cab dark. The lighting was poor. Half the tall sodium lamps were burnt out, casting long, eerie shadows across the cracked asphalt. A little shiver of unease went down my spine. My sixth sense was tingling. The place just felt off. It was too quiet, too still. But I was exhausted, and the thought of getting back on the highway to find another spot was more than I could bear. "It's fine, Martha," I told myself. "You're just tired." I backed my rig into a spot near the entrance under one of the few working lights, where I'd be most visible from the highway. I shut down my engine, and the silence that descended was immediate and absolute. No hum of other trucks, no distant highway noise, just a dead, heavy quiet. I decided to use the restroom before I settled into my sleeper berth. I grabbed my keys and a small flashlight, locked my cab, and started walking toward the concrete building in the center of the lot. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was faint at first, just a strange, coppery tang on the humid night air. As I got closer to the restroom building, it grew stronger, thicker. It was a smell I recognized, a smell you never forget. It was the smell of blood. Not just a little, but a lot. It was a thick, metallic slaughterhouse stench that coated the back of my throat and made my stomach churn. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart starting to pound. My mind raced. Had there been an accident? A fight? Was someone hurt? I shone my flashlight beam on the ground, searching for any sign of what could be causing the horrific smell. The concrete was clean. There were no stains, no pools of darkness. The smell was coming from the restroom building. It was pouring out of the dark, open doorways like a foul, invisible fog. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, get back in my truck, and leave. But the thought that someone might be inside, bleeding hurt, overrode my fear. I was a certified first responder. I had a duty to check. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone in there? Does anyone need help?" Only silence answered me. The smell seemed to intensify, as if in response to my voice. It was so strong now it was almost suffocating. I took a deep breath of the cleaner air behind me, held it, and forced my legs to move forward. I walked to the entrance of the women's restroom, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path in front of me. The inside was old and grimy. The tile was cracked and the grout was stained with years of mildew. There were 3 stalls, all with their doors slightly ajar. The air inside was thick and heavy with the smell of blood, so overpowering I had to cover my nose and mouth with the collar of my shirt. "Hello?" I said again, my voice muffled. I pushed open the first stall door with the toe of my boot. It was empty. The toilet was stained but clean of any fresh horror. I moved to the second stall, empty. My flashlight beam moved to the third stall at the very end. The door was open just a crack. I nudged it with my foot and it swung inward with a low groan. The stall was empty, but the inside of the toilet bowl was filled to the brim with a thick, dark, viscous liquid that looked exactly like blood. It wasn't just in the water, it was filled like a bowl of soup. My stomach heaved and I stumbled backward, gagging. I shone my light around the rest of the room. The sinks were empty. The trash can was empty. There was no source for the smell, no explanation for the blood-filled toilet other than what was right in front of me. I backed out of the restroom, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't a crime scene. This was something else. Something unnatural. I turned to run back to my truck, and that's when I saw the other truck, the one parked at the far end of the lot. A light had come on in its cab. A dim red light casting a hellish glow through the windshield. And there was a figure in the driver's seat. A man. I couldn't see his face clearly, just his silhouette against the red light. He was staring right at me. He was perfectly still, just a dark shape in a red-lit box watching me. A wave of pure terror, colder and sharper than anything I had ever felt, washed over me. The quiet, the smell, the blood, the watcher in the other truck, it all coalesced into a single terrifying realization. I was in terrible danger. I didn't scream, I didn't make a sound, I just ran. I sprinted across the asphalt, my boots pounding on the ground, fumbling with my keys as I ran. I didn't look back at the other truck. I didn't want to see if he was still watching, or worse, if he was getting out. I reached my cab, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key in the lock. I threw the door open, scrambled inside, and slammed it shut, hitting the lock button with the heel of my hand. I didn't wait for the engine to warm up. I cranked the ignition and the diesel engine roared to life, shattering the dead silence. I threw it into gear and stomped on the accelerator, pulling out of the parking spot with a screech of tires. As I swung the rig around to head for the exit ramp, my headlights swept across the lot. The other truck was gone. The spot at the far end of the lot was empty. There was no way, absolutely no way, that a semi-truck could have started its engine, pulled out of its spot, and driven away in the 30 seconds it took me to run to my cab without me hearing or seeing it. It had simply vanished. I didn't slow down. I hit the on-ramp to the interstate at a speed that was probably illegal and definitely unsafe, but I didn't care. I merged into traffic, my eyes glued to my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the phantom truck with its red-lit cab appear behind me. But there was nothing. I drove for another 2 hours running on pure adrenaline until I reached a massive, brightly lit, brand new mega truck stop that was bustling with activity even at 3 a.m. I pulled into a spot right next to the building surrounded by other trucks and just sat there, shaking for a long time. The next day, I did some research. I looked up the rest area on Interstate 55 south of Grenada. I found a news article from the early 1990s. A trucker had been found murdered there in the restroom. He had been stabbed to death, his body left in one of the stalls. The crime was particularly brutal and the killer was never caught. The article mentioned that the victim's truck had been found parked at the far end of the lot, its engine cold. The police theorized that the killer might have been another trucker. I also found a string of posts on a trucker forum, a thread titled Haunted Rest Stops. Several drivers mentioned that specific rest area. They all told a similar story, a feeling of being watched, an overwhelming, inexplicable smell of blood. And some of them mentioned seeing a phantom truck parked in the dark, a truck that would vanish in the blink of an eye. One driver claimed he saw a man in the cab, a man whose face was a mask of rage, his cab lit with a strange, bloody red light. I had stumbled into a ghost story, a violent, angry memory imprinted on a lonely patch of asphalt. I had smelled the phantom blood of a long-dead man, and I had been watched by his murderer, or perhaps by the victim himself, a silent, spectral guardian warning me away. My sixth sense hadn't been warning me about a living threat. It had been warning me about a place soaked in violence and death, a place where the past isn't past at all. I sold my rig a few years after that. I drive a desk now. The freedom of the road is a wonderful thing, but some places are best left to the ghosts that claim them. My name is Henry Douglas. I've been on the road for what feels like a lifetime. 35 years to be exact. I'm a flatbedder, mostly hauling steel coils and construction materials. It's a tough job, hard on the body and harder on the soul, but it's an honest living. In all my years crisscrossing this country, I've seen my share of strange things. I've seen weather that can tear a rig apart. I've seen accidents that would make your stomach turn. And I've seen the desperation in men's eyes at 4 a.m. in a lonely truck stop. I'm a man who believes in what he can see and touch. I believe in the solid weight of my load, the rumble of my engine, and the grit of the road beneath my tires, but I also believe in omens. And on the back roads of the Mississippi Delta, I came face to face with the oldest omen of them all. This happened a few years back in the dead of winter. I was hauling a load of I-beams from a mill in Arkansas to a construction site in Mobile, Alabama. The weather had been foul all week, a miserable, bone-chilling rain that never seemed to stop. The main highways were a mess of spray and traffic, so I decided to take a shortcut I knew, a series of state highways that cut right through the heart of the Delta. It's a desolate route, especially in winter. The cotton fields are bare and brown, the trees are skeletal and black against a perpetually gray sky, and the whole world seems to be sleeping a cold, damp, and fitful sleep. The rain had finally let up that evening, but it left behind a thick, ground-hugging fog that was even more treacherous. It clung to the low-lying areas, turning the road into a gray, featureless tunnel. I was on a particularly lonely stretch of two-lane blacktop somewhere between Greenville and Yazoo City. The road was slick, and the fog was getting denser by the minute. I was hunched over the wheel, my eyes straining to pick out the white line on the shoulder, my speed down to a crawl. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shape in the fog at the edge of my headlights. I thought it was a deer or maybe a stray dog. I slowed down even more, my hand hovering over the air brake valve. As I got closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a dog, a very large dog. It was standing on the shoulder of the road, perfectly still, its head raised as if it were sniffing the air. but there was something wrong about it. It was big, bigger than any dog I'd ever seen. It was built like a wolf or a Great Dane, but thicker, more muscular, with a massive head and powerful shoulders. And it was black. Not just black, but a deep, absolute light-swallowing black. The kind of black that seems to have no texture or dimension, like a hole cut out of the fabric of the night. My high beams hit it full on, but its coat didn't reflect the light. It seemed to absorb it. I brought my rig to a stop about 50 feet away, the engine idling with a low rumble. The dog didn't move. It just stood there, a silent black statue in the swirling fog. I felt a prickle of unease, a cold knot tightening in my gut. This was no ordinary stray. There was an aura of intelligence about it, of ancient, malevolent purpose. I reached for my air horn, thinking a loud blast would scare it off the road. My hand was on the cord, but I hesitated. Something held me back. A voice in the back of my mind, a primal instinct, screamed at me not to challenge it. As I sat there, frozen, the dog turned its head and looked at me. Its eyes glowed in my headlights. But they weren't the green or yellow-white reflection you see in an animal's eyes at night. They were red, a deep, burning ember red, like two hot coals smoldering in the darkness of its face. The sight of those eyes sent a shockwave of pure, undiluted fear through me. This was no animal. This was something else entirely. The stories my grandmother used to tell me, stories from the old country, came flooding back into my mind. Stories of the black dog, the hellhound, the spectral beast that walks the lonely roads at night. An omen of death. They say if you see it once, it's a warning. If you see it twice, you're marked. If you see it a third time, your time has come. The dog held my gaze for what felt like an eternity. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My world had shrunk to the space between my windshield and those two burning red eyes. Then, as slowly and deliberately as it had turned to face me, it turned away. It took one last look down the empty, fog-shrouded road ahead of me, then it simply stepped off the shoulder and vanished into the dense woods that lined the road. It didn't run. It just disappeared into the darkness as if it were made of shadow itself. I sat there for a long time, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The spot where it had stood was empty. The fog swirled, the engine rumbled, but the oppressive, terrifying presence was gone. I finally managed to get my shaking hands to put the truck in gear and continue on my way. My eyes scanning the woods, my mind replaying the sight of those glowing red eyes. I thought that was the end of it. A terrifying, inexplicable encounter on a lonely road. A story I would tell to other drivers who would either nod in understanding or laugh it off as a trick of the light. I was wrong. It was only the beginning. About an hour later, I was approaching a town called Belzoni. The fog had thinned a little, and I was starting to feel a semblance of normalcy return. I was coming up on a tricky intersection, a place where another state highway crossed the one I was on. It was a four-way stop, and I was slowing down, preparing to make the required stop. That's when I saw it again. It was sitting in the middle of the intersection, directly under the single blinking red light. It was the same dog. The same impossible size, the same light-devouring black coat. It was sitting on its haunches, its massive head cocked to one side as if it were waiting for me. As my headlights hit it, it looked up, and once again I was transfixed by those two burning red eyes. This time the fear was different. It wasn't just a shock. It was a cold, creeping dread. This was the second time. If you see it twice, you're marked. The old words echoed in my mind. The dog wasn't just a random apparition, it was following me, it was leading me, it was on my path. I slammed on the brakes, bringing the heavy rig to a screeching halt 100 feet from the intersection. The dog didn't flinch. It just sat there, watching me, its red eyes glowing with an unholy light. I had a choice. I could try to drive through the intersection past it, or I could turn. The road to the right led south, away from my intended route, but it was a way to avoid getting any closer to that thing. My instincts took over. I wasn't going near it. I checked for traffic, there was none, and cranked the wheel hard to the right, executing a slow, careful turn onto the other highway. The whole time I kept my eyes locked on the dog. It watched me go, its head turning to follow my truck. It didn't get up, it didn't bark. It just watched. As I completed the turn and accelerated away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The intersection was empty. The dog was gone. I was now on a completely different route, heading south into the deepest, darkest part of the delta. I was lost, but I didn't care. I was just trying to get away from the omen that was now hunting me. I drove for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Was I going crazy? Was this some kind of waking nightmare, brought on by fatigue? But the fear was too real, too visceral. The road I was on grew narrower and more dilapidated. The asphalt was cracked and broken, and the woods pressed in on either side, their branches scraping against the side of my trailer. I came to an old, rickety-looking wooden bridge that spanned a dark, sluggish creek. A sign riddled with buckshot holes warned of a low weight limit. I didn't have a choice. I had to cross it. I eased the heavy truck onto the bridge, the wooden planks groaning and creaking in protest under the weight. I held my breath, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, expecting the whole structure to collapse at any moment. I made it to the other side, the tires hitting solid ground with a reassuring thump. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. And then I saw it. For the third time. It was standing in the middle of the road on the far side of the bridge, blocking my path. It was no longer just sitting or standing. It was in a low crouch, its muscles tensed, its head lowered. A low, guttural growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate the very air in my cab, reached my ears. Its lips were pulled back, revealing a set of long yellow fangs that gleamed in my headlights. And its eyes were no longer just glowing embers. They were blazing pools of fire filled with a terrible, ancient hatred. If you see it a third time, your time has come. This was it. This was the end. The creature had cornered me. I was trapped. The flimsy bridge behind me, the demonic beast in front of me, a wave of utter despair washed over me. I was going to die out here on this forgotten road at the hands of something that shouldn't exist. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was defiance. Maybe it was the last desperate act of a cornered man. I wasn't going to just sit here and wait for it. I laid on my air horn, a deafening, continuous blast that shattered the night. And I floored it. I aimed my massive 40-ton rig directly at the black dog and charged. The engine screamed. The truck lurched forward, gaining speed. The dog didn't move. It held its ground, its growl rising in pitch to a terrifying, unearthly shriek. The distance closed in seconds. I braced for impact, for the sickening thud of hitting the creature, for the windshield to explode, for the truck to be thrown from the road. I closed my eyes at the last second. There was no impact. The shrieking stopped. The truck passed through the spot where the dog had been as if it were nothing but smoke. I opened my eyes. The road ahead was empty. I looked in my mirrors. The road behind me was empty. The black dog was gone. I kept driving, my body shaking uncontrollably until the sun came up. I found my way back to a main highway and pulled into a truck stop, my mind a complete blank. I sat in my truck for an hour just staring at the sunrise, trying to process what had happened. I never made it to Mobile. I called. My dispatcher told him I was sick and dropped the load at a yard in Jackson. I took a week off. I couldn't get back in the truck. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those burning red eyes. When I finally got back on the road, I learned that there had been a catastrophic failure on that old wooden bridge I had crossed. It had collapsed late that night, just a short time after I had driven over it. If I had stayed on my original route, if I hadn't been diverted by the black dog at the intersection, I would have reached that bridge hours later. I would have been on it when it fell. I am not a religious man, but I believe something was watching out for me that night. The black dog of the Delta. I had always heard it was an omen of death, but what if it's not that simple? What if it's a guide, a psychopomp, a spirit that walks the line between life and death? It showed me my death, the death that was waiting for me on that bridge. It marked me for a fate that was already sealed. But by running from it, I had inadvertently run from my own demise. It didn't hunt me to kill me, it hunted me to save me. I still see it sometimes in my dreams. A great black dog with eyes of fire standing on a lonely road in the fog. I'm not afraid of it anymore. I understand now. The Delta has its own rules, its own guardians, and sometimes the greatest mercy comes in the form of the greatest terror. My name is Rachel Simmons. I'm one of the younger drivers out here, been at it for about 5 years. I got into trucking because I love to travel, to see the country. I'm a wanderer by nature. I mostly haul produce, which means I'm always on a tight schedule, running from the fields of California to the markets of the East Coast. It's a lot of night driving, a lot of pushing the limits of your logbook. You learn to appreciate the little pockets of light in the vast darkness of the American landscape. But one night in Mississippi, I learned that not all lights are a sign of welcome. Some are a warning, and some are a trap. I was on a cross-country run hauling a load of fresh strawberries from Watsonville, California to a distributor in Miami. Strawberries are a high-stress load. They have a very short shelf life. You can't be late. I was making good time until I hit a series of violent thunderstorms that chased me all the way from Texas into Louisiana. By the time I crossed into Mississippi, I was hours behind schedule, stressed out and bone-tired. The rain was coming down in sheets, a relentless, deafening downpour that made the world outside my windshield a blurry, chaotic mess. My wipers were on their highest setting, but they could barely keep up. I was on Highway 82, a long straight shot through the flat, dark expanse of the Delta. The road was starting to flood in places, with large pools of standing water that would grab my tires and try to pull me off the road. It was dangerous, nerve-wracking driving. Around midnight, somewhere in the vast empty space between Indianola and Itabena, my truck started to sputter. The engine coughed, the dashboard lights flickered, and then, with a final dying gasp, the engine cut out completely. I managed to coast the massive, powerless rig onto the shoulder, the truck coming to a stop with a heavy sigh. I tried the ignition. Nothing. The battery was dead, or the alternator had given up the ghost. Either way, I was stranded. The silence that followed was almost as deafening as the engine's roar had been. All I could hear was the relentless drumming of the rain on the roof of my cab and the distant rumble of thunder. My cell phone had no signal. Of course, I was in a dead zone in the middle of a biblical downpour in a broken-down truck. It was a perfect storm of bad luck. I sat there for a while, a knot of panic tightening in my chest. I was a young woman, alone, in the middle of nowhere. It was the nightmare scenario every female trucker tries not to think about. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm myself. Panicking wouldn't help. I had a full pantry in my sleeper, plenty of water, and a secure cab. I could wait until morning. Someone would eventually find me. I was trying to settle in, to make peace with my situation, when I saw it. A light. It was off to my right, maybe a quarter of a mile away across a flooded field. It was a single, small, flickering point of light like a candle flame. It was coming from the window of a small, dark structure that I hadn't even noticed before. It looked like an old, dilapidated shack, the kind you see scattered all over the Delta. remnants of old sharecropper farms. The light was warm and steady, a tiny beacon in the vast, stormy darkness. Hope surged through me. A house, a person, someone who could help, or at least had a landline I could use to call for a tow. The thought of staying in my cold, dark truck all night versus the possibility of a warm, dry place and a telephone made my decision for me. It was a risk, walking out into the storm to a stranger's house, but it felt like a risk worth taking. I pulled on my heaviest raincoat, grabbed my most powerful flashlight, and locked up my truck. I climbed down from the cab, my boots sinking into the soft, muddy shoulder. The rain was cold and hard, plastering my hair to my face in seconds. I turned on my flashlight and started walking toward the light, my beam cutting a shaky path through the deluge. The field was worse than I thought. It was completely flooded, the water ankle-deep in some places, calf-deep in others. I stumbled through the thick, cold mud, my jeans soaked, my feet numb. The shack looked farther away than I had thought, the single point of light seeming to mock me, never getting any closer. The wind howled, and the rain felt like tiny, sharp needles against my skin. After what felt like an eternity of slogging through the mud and water, I finally reached it. The shack was in even worse shape up close than it had looked from the road. It was a small, one-room structure made of unpainted, weathered wood. The roof was sagging, the porch was collapsing, and the windows were boarded up. All except one. A single, small, square window on the side of the shack was uncovered, and it was from this window that the candlelight emanated. I stepped onto the rickety porch, which groaned ominously under my weight. The smell of damp, rotting wood and mildew was thick in the air. I hesitated. The place looked abandoned, derelict, but the light was undeniable. Someone had to be inside. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and thin against the roar of the storm. "Is anyone home?" My truck broke down. I need to use a phone. There was no answer, just the sound of the rain drumming on the tin roof. I knocked on the door, a flimsy wooden thing that felt like it would crumble if I pushed too hard. "Hello? I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm stranded. Can you help me?" Silence. I was starting to feel a deep sense of unease. The initial hope that had propelled me across the field was being replaced by a creeping dread. Something was wrong. I moved to the side of the shack, to the single, unboarded window. I wiped the rain from my eyes and peered inside. The inside of the shack was bare. There was no furniture, no stove, no sign of human habitation. The floor was dirt and the walls were bare wood, stained with water and time. In the exact center of the room, sitting on the dirt floor, was a single white candle stuck in a simple tin holder. Its flame flickered and danced, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed on the walls like living things. There was no one in the room. My blood ran cold. Who would light a candle in the middle of an abandoned, empty shack in a thunderstorm? It made no sense. I shone my flashlight beam through the window, sweeping it across the small room. The beam landed on the far wall, and I saw something that made me gasp and stumble backward, my heart seizing in my chest. Scratched into the wooden wall over and over again were words, dozens of them, hundreds of them, carved into the wood with something sharp. They were all the same 2 words. "Get out." I didn't need to be told twice. A wave of pure primal terror washed over me, colder and more terrifying than the rain. I turned and ran. I didn't use the porch. I just jumped off the side, landing in the deep mud. I scrambled and slipped and fell, picking myself up and continuing to run, my breath sobbing in my throat. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if the light was still there. I just ran blindly through the storm back toward the distant, familiar shape of my truck. I finally reached the road, my lungs burning, my body covered in mud. I scrambled back into my cab, locked the door, and collapsed into the driver's seat, shaking uncontrollably. I looked back across the field. The shack was dark. The light was gone. I sat there for the rest of the night, wide awake, my eyes scanning the darkness, my heart pounding at every rumble of thunder. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. As the first gray light of dawn broke, the rain finally stopped. The world outside was gray and washed out. I looked across the field to where the shack had been. There was no shack. The field was empty. There was no dilapidated building, no sagging roof, no boarded-up windows. There was just a flat, empty, flooded field stretching to a line of distant trees. It hadn't just gone dark. It had vanished completely. A few hours later, a highway patrol car pulled up behind me. The officer was a kind, older man who called for a tow truck for me. As we waited, I asked him about the area. "I could have sworn I saw an old shack out in that field last night," I said, trying to sound casual. The officer's friendly expression tightened. He looked out across the empty field, his eyes sad. "You saw the candle shack," he said, his voice low. He told me the story. Decades ago, a woman had lived in that shack. She was a recluse, a widow who had lost her husband and son to a fever. She kept to herself, and the locals mostly left her alone. One night, a group of drunk, cruel young men decided to have some fun with the old woman. They went out to her shack, tormented her, and in the end, they set it on fire, leaving her locked inside. She burned to death. "They say her spirit is still out there," the officer said, his gaze still fixed on the empty field. "They say that on stormy nights, when a traveler is in trouble, the shack appears. The light in the window, it's a lure. It's her trying to lure people to the spot where she died, wanting them to share her fate, to feel the terror she felt." He looked at me, his eyes serious. "But they also say she had a last moment of goodness in her, a part of her that fights the rage. That's the warning, the words on the wall. It's her own spirit trying to save you from herself. You were lucky. Some who have gone out to that shack have never come back. They just find their abandoned cars on the side of the road the next morning." The tow truck arrived and hauled my rig to a shop in the next town. It was a simple fix, a fried alternator. As I paid the mechanic, I couldn't stop thinking about the officer's story. I had been lured by a ghost, a tormented soul caught between a desire for revenge and a lingering spark of humanity. I had walked into a trap and had been saved by a warning from the very ghost that had set it. I still love to travel, to see the country, but I'm more cautious now. I understand that the darkness on the lonely roads holds more than just the absence of light. It holds stories and it holds pain. And I know that when you see a single, welcoming light flickering in the middle of a storm, sometimes the bravest and smartest thing you can do is stay in the dark. My name is Eddie Johnson. I'm a company driver for a big refrigerated carrier. For the last 15 years, my life has been a series of deadlines, temperature checks, and long, lonely nights on the highway. I've driven through every state in the lower 48, seen every kind of landscape this country has to offer. I'm a no-nonsense kind of guy. I deal in facts, figures, and the hard reality of the road. I'm not one for ghost stories or folklore. At least I wasn't. But one sweltering, humid night on a stretch of Highway 49 in Mississippi, I heard something that I can't explain with facts or figures. Something that chilled me to the bone and made me a believer. I was hauling a load of frozen shrimp from the Gulf Coast up to a processing plant in St. Louis. It was the middle of July and the Mississippi Delta was at its most oppressive. The heat didn't break when the sun went down. It just transformed into a thick, suffocating humidity that made the air feel heavy and wet. I was driving north on US 49, a road that cuts right through the heart of the Delta's swamp country. On either side of the highway, there was nothing but dark, dense swampland. a tangled mess of cypress trees, murky water, and thick undergrowth. The night was dark, the moon hidden by a layer of high, thin clouds. The only sounds were the drone of my reefer unit, the hum of my tires on the asphalt, and the constant high-pitched buzz of insects that seemed to permeate everything. It's an eerie landscape at night. The cypress trees with their strange, knobby knees sticking out of the black water look like skeletal sentinels guarding some ancient, forbidden secret. Your headlights catch the glint of eyes in the darkness. Raccoons, opossums, maybe an alligator, and you're reminded that you're just a visitor in a wild and untamed world. I was feeling the miles, my eyes getting heavy, so I rolled down my window to let the thick, warm air blast my face and keep me awake. The smell of the swamp rolled in, a rich, earthy scent of damp soil, decaying vegetation, and stagnant water. It's not a pleasant smell, but it's a living one. I was somewhere between Chula and Tutwiler, a particularly remote and swampy stretch of the highway. I had my music playing, some old-school rock and roll to keep my energy up. I was singing along, tapping my hand on the steering wheel when I heard it. It was a sound that cut through the music, through the engine noise, through everything. It was a scream. It wasn't just any scream. It was a woman's scream, high-pitched, terrified, and filled with a pain and anguish that was utterly chilling. It was a sound of pure, raw terror. The kind of scream someone makes when they are facing the worst moment of their life. It came from the swamp, off to the right side of the road. I immediately slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. The big rig shuddered to a stop, the air brakes hissing. I killed the music and leaned out the window, listening. The swamp was silent for a moment, and I thought maybe I had imagined it. Then it came again, closer this time. Help me. It was a long, drawn-out wail, a woman's voice choked with sobs and terror. It was followed by another blood-curdling scream that seemed to echo through the cypress trees. My mind raced. Someone was out there. A woman. She was hurt, or she was being attacked. My duty as a decent human being was clear. I had to help. I grabbed my heavy-duty mag-light flashlight from the door pocket, put on my hazard lights, and radioed my dispatcher. Dispatch, this is truck 7-4-1. I'm on Highway 49, about 10 miles north of Chula. I'm stopped on the shoulder. I hear a woman screaming for help in the swamp. I'm going to investigate. Please notify the local authorities. Copy that, 7-4-1. The dispatcher's tinny voice came back. Advise you to be careful. Police are on their way, but it could be a while. I knew he was right. Out here, a while could mean an hour or more. I couldn't just sit here and wait while someone was in trouble. I climbed down from my cab, the humidity hitting me like a wet blanket. The insect noise was a deafening wall of sound. I vaulted the guardrail and stood at the edge of the swamp. The ground was soft and muddy, and the black still water was only a few feet from the road's edge. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice sounding weak against the cacophony of the swamp. "I'm here to help." "Where are you?" A sob answered me, seemingly just a few yards into the darkness. "Please. He's going to kill me. Please, help." The voice was so close, so real, so filled with genuine terror. I didn't hesitate. I plunged into the swamp, my flashlight beam cutting a narrow, shaky path through the oppressive darkness. The water was up to my knees in an instant, cold and slimy. The mud sucked at my boots, trying to pull me down. I pushed through the thick undergrowth, branches and vines grabbing at my clothes. "Keep talking," I yelled. "I'm coming." "Over here," the voice cried, sounding slightly to my left. "Hurry!" I changed direction, pushing through a thicket of reeds. The water was getting deeper, up to my waist now. I could feel things brushing against my legs in the dark water. Weeds, submerged logs, maybe something else. I tried not to think about snakes or alligators. "I can't see you," I shouted, panning my flashlight beam back and forth. The light reflected off countless pairs of tiny eyes, spiders, frogs, insects. The cypress trees loomed over me like ancient, gnarled giants. The screaming started again, a series of frantic, terrified shrieks that seemed to come from all around me at once. It was disorienting. One moment the voice was to my left, the next it was to my right. Then it sounded like it was directly behind me. "Where are you?" I yelled, turning in a circle, my heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and a new, creeping fear. This wasn't right. The acoustics in the swamp were strange, but not this strange. "He's got me!" the voice shrieked, and this time it sounded like it was right in my ear. I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. There was nothing there, just a curtain of Spanish moss hanging from a cypress branch, swaying gently in the still air. The temperature seemed to drop. A cold mist rose from the surface of the black water, swirling around my legs. The incessant buzzing of the insects faded away, replaced by a dead, unnatural silence. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart. I was starting to realize that I had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't a woman in trouble. This was a trap. I began to back away slowly, trying to find my way back to the road. The light from my truck's hazard flashers was a faint, pulsing red glow, barely visible through the thick trees. It looked a million miles away. A soft, feminine laugh echoed through the swamp, a sound that was even more terrifying than the screams. It was a cold, cruel, mocking laugh. It was the sound of a predator playing with its food. I turned and scrambled through the water, no longer trying to be quiet. I just wanted out. I stumbled, falling forward into the slimy water, my flashlight flying from my hand and extinguishing with a soft hiss. I was plunged into absolute, terrifying darkness. I flailed in the water, trying to get my footing, my hands sinking into the soft, putrid mud of the swamp bottom. The laughter came again, closer this time. I could feel a presence in the water with me, a cold spot moving through the swamp. I finally found my feet and lurched toward the faint red glow of my truck. I could hear splashing in the water behind me, something moving fast, closing the distance. I didn't dare look back. I just kept pushing forward, my lungs burning, my mind screaming. I burst through the last line of trees and scrambled up the muddy embankment onto the solid ground of the shoulder, collapsing onto the asphalt, gasping for breath, my body covered in mud and slime. I lay there for a moment, then pushed myself up and looked back into the swamp. In the pulsing red light of my hazard flashers, I saw her. She was standing at the water's edge, knee-deep in the black water. It was a woman, or the shape of one. She was tall and gaunt, with long, stringy black hair that hung over her face. She was wearing a tattered white dress that seemed to glow in the dim light. She slowly lifted her head and the hair fell away from her face. Her skin was pale green, like something that had been underwater for a very long time. Her face was twisted in an expression of eternal, agonizing grief. But her eyes were black, empty holes, and from them streamed tears of black, viscous ooze that ran down her decaying cheeks. She opened her mouth, and it was not a scream that came out this time, but a low, mournful, gurgling moan, a sound that seemed to come from the bottom of the swamp itself. It was a sound of such profound loss and sorrow that it made my own heart ache. Then as I watched, horrified, she slowly sank back into the black water, disappearing beneath the surface without a ripple, leaving nothing behind but the dead silence of the swamp. I scrambled back to my truck, locked the doors, and just sat there, shivering until the flashing blue and red lights of a sheriff's cruiser appeared down the road. 2 deputies got out, their expressions wary. I told them my story, babbling about the screams, the chase, the woman in the water. The older deputy just nodded slowly, his face grim. He didn't look surprised. "You met the swamp woman," he said, his voice flat. "You're lucky to be alive. Most who follow her into the water don't come back out." He told me the local legend. Years ago, a young woman was driving on this very stretch of highway with her husband. They were arguing, a terrible, bitter fight. In a fit of rage, he pulled the car over, dragged her from the vehicle, and murdered her, dumping her body in the swamp. They never found him, and they never recovered her body. "They say her spirit is trapped here," the deputy said, his eyes scanning the dark, silent swamp. "She's forever reliving the last moments of her life, screaming for a help that never came. Some say she's an innocent victim, her screams just an echo of her own murder. Others say her grief and rage have twisted her into something malevolent, something that wants to drag others down into the swamp with her, so she won't be so alone in her watery grave." They gave me a blanket and stayed with me until the tow truck came. My truck had a flooded engine. I'd be going nowhere that night. As they towed my rig away, I looked back at the dark stretch of highway, at the black waiting swamp. I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. I heard a woman's dying screams, and I saw the face of her eternal grief. I don't know if she was a victim or a monster, an echo or a lure. Maybe she's both. All I know is that the swamps of the Delta hold more than just mud and alligators. They hold pain. And some screams, once you hear them, never really go away. My name is Clara Vaughn. I'm a line haul driver, which means I do the same run over and over again, mostly at night. For the past 8 years, my route has been a simple one. A dedicated run from a distribution center in Nashville to another in Dallas 5 nights a week. I drive the same roads, see the same signs, stop at the same truck stops. It's a life of repetition, a hypnotic loop of asphalt and yellow lines. You become a creature of habit and routine. You learn to trust the familiar. My route takes me through Mississippi on I-20, a road I know like the back of my hand. But one night, a simple detour threw my predictable world into a nightmare of looping streets and distorted time, and taught me that even the most familiar places have a dark side you've never seen. It was a Tuesday night or maybe a Wednesday morning. The days and nights blur together on my schedule. I was westbound on I-20, making my way across Mississippi. The night was clear and quiet. I was in the groove. The miles rolling by, my mind in that state of relaxed alertness that every long-haul driver knows. Then I saw the flashing lights up ahead, a sea of them, red, blue, and yellow painting the dark sky. A bad accident. A state trooper was diverting all traffic off the interstate onto the next exit, which happened to be for U.S. Highway 82 heading toward Greenwood. Detours are a part of the job, an annoyance you learn to live with. My GPS was already recalculating, showing a long, meandering path that would take me north to Greenwood, then west on a series of smaller highways before eventually dropping me back onto I-20 somewhere near the Louisiana border. It would add at least 2 hours to my trip, but there was no other choice. I followed the line of trucks off the interstate and onto Highway 82. It was a good road, a 4-lane divided highway, and for the first hour, everything was normal. The city of Greenwood is a hub in the Delta, a place I'd passed through in the daytime before. It's a city with a lot of history, some of it dark, but at 2 in the morning, it was just a collection of sleeping buildings and traffic lights blinking yellow. My GPS instructed me to take an exit into the city itself to connect with another highway, US 49E, that would take me west. I followed the directions, my rig rolling off the bypass and onto the city streets. The streets were deserted, the storefronts dark. It was a typical sleeping city. I followed the GPS route, taking a right, then a left. The voice on my phone told me to continue for 2 miles, then turn right onto Main Street. I drove, passing darkened houses and closed-down gas stations. The architecture was old, with beautiful but decaying brick buildings from the early 20th century. After a few minutes, I came to a stoplight. The cross street was Main Street. I turned right just as instructed. I was now heading through what looked like the old downtown district. The buildings were taller here, the street wider. I drove for another mile, expecting the GPS to tell me where to turn next to get out of the city and onto the westbound highway. But the voice remained silent. The little blue dot on my screen showed me proceeding down Main Street, but the route ahead was no longer highlighted. I checked the screen. GPS signal lost, it read. I cursed under my breath. It happened sometimes in older cities with tall buildings. I wasn't worried. Main Street had to lead somewhere. I'd just keep going, straight until I was out of the downtown area and my signal returned. I kept driving. I passed a grand old movie theater with a darkened marquee, a city hall with a clock tower, and a small park with a Confederate soldier statue. I drove for another 5 minutes and the downtown buildings began to thin out, replaced by residential houses again. Good, I thought, I'm getting through it. I passed a distinctive-looking church with a large, circular stained glass window. Then I passed a gas station with a flickering neon sign. Then I saw the movie theater again. I braked so hard my seatbelt locked, the truck groaning in protest. It was the same theater, the one with the darkened marquee. I was back on the same stretch of Main Street I had been on minutes ago. My heart started to beat a little faster. I must have made a wrong turn somewhere, gotten turned around without realizing it. It was embarrassing, but it happened. I kept driving more slowly this time, paying close attention. There was the city hall with the clock tower. There was the park with the statue. I was definitely on the same street. I drove past them and once again the buildings thinned out. I saw the church with the round window. I saw the gas station with the flickering sign. And then, up ahead, I saw the movie theater. A cold, sick feeling started to creep into the pit of my stomach. This wasn't possible. I was on a straight road. I hadn't turned. I hadn't deviated. How could I be back where I started? It was like the street was a conveyor belt and I was just driving in place. I stopped the truck in the middle of the deserted street. The silence was absolute. I tried my phone again. Still no GPS signal. I tried to use the map app, but it wouldn't load. I tried my CB radio. I called out for a radio check for anyone who might be in the area. Nothing but static answered me. It was like the entire city was in a dead zone, cut off from the rest of the world. Panic began to set in, a real cold, creeping terror. I decided to try something different. I wasn't going to follow the street. At the next intersection, I took a hard right, turning off Main Street onto a narrow side street lined with dark, sleeping houses. I'll just go around the block, I told myself, my voice sounding shaky in the silent cab. I drove down the dark street for 2 blocks, then took a left, then another left, which should have put me on a street parallel to Main. I drove for a few more blocks, then took a final right, a turn that should have had me crossing Main Street and heading away from the loop. The turn took me right back in front of the movie theater. A sob of pure frustration and fear escaped my lips. I was trapped. I was in a loop, a geographical and logical impossibility. Every turn I made, every attempt to break the cycle just led me right back to the same spot. The city of Greenwood had become my own personal Escher painting. I tried again, and again. I turned left, I turned right. I drove for what felt like miles down side streets, only to find myself impossibly rounding a corner and seeing that damned clock tower or that silent movie theater. The city wasn't letting me go. The streets were actively rearranging themselves, funneling me back to the center, back into the loop. Time started to feel strange, distorted. I had been driving for what felt like hours, but the clock on my dashboard seemed to have barely moved. It was perpetually 2:37 a.m. The moon hadn't moved in the sky. The world was frozen and I was the only thing moving endlessly through a nightmare that kept resetting itself. I was on the verge of a complete breakdown, ready to just stop the truck and scream when I saw something different. As I passed the park with the statue for what must have been the 20th time, I saw a figure sitting on a bench. It was an old man dressed in a simple, old-fashioned suit holding a hat in his lap. He was just sitting there watching me. On my next loop, I stopped the truck beside the park. I was terrified, but the thought of another human being, another person to talk to, overrode my fear. I rolled down my window. "Excuse me," I called out. "Can you help me? I'm lost. I'm trying to get to Highway 49E, but I keep ending up back here." The old man looked up at me. His face was deeply wrinkled, his eyes pale and cloudy. He didn't seem surprised to see a massive semi-truck stopped in the middle of the street. He just gave me a slow, sad smile. "You're on the detour," he said, his voice soft and raspy like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "A lot of folks get lost on the detour." "How do I get off?" I asked, my voice pleading. "Every road I take just brings me back here." "The road remembers," he said, his gaze becoming distant, looking at something far away. "This town, it doesn't like to let go of things. It holds on to its memories. You're just caught in one of them." He looked back at me, his pale eyes seeming to look right through me. "You can't break the loop by going forward. You have to go back." "Go back?" I asked, confused. "What do you mean?" "You have to go back to the beginning," he said, his voice fading, becoming part of the night's silence. "You have to undo the turn." Before I could ask him what he meant, he simply wasn't there anymore. The bench was empty. He had vanished as if he were never there at all. I sat there, my mind reeling. You have to go back to the beginning. You have to undo the turn. It made no sense, but it was the only advice I had. The beginning. The turn onto Main Street. With a new, desperate plan, I continued on my loop. I passed the church, the gas station, and there it was, the intersection where I had first turned right onto Main Street. This time, instead of going forward into the loop, I stopped. I put the truck in reverse. It was a difficult, dangerous maneuver. Backing a 75-foot rig through a city intersection in the dark is a trucker's worst nightmare. But I did it. Slowly, carefully, I reversed the truck, my mirrors my only guide. I backed through the intersection, undoing the right turn, putting myself back on the street that had led me from the bypass. The moment my trailer cleared the intersection, the world changed. The GPS on my phone sprang to life with a cheerful chime. "In 500 feet, turn left onto Highway 49E, it said. The clock on my dashboard read 4:48 a.m. 2 hours had passed. The CB radio crackled with the distant chatter of other truckers. I looked at the intersection. Main Street looked like a normal street again. I took the left turn my GPS indicated, and within minutes I was on a dark highway heading west, the lights of Greenwood shrinking in my rearview mirror. I never told my company what happened. I just logged the delay as detour. How could I explain that I was trapped in a time loop in a haunted city? How could I explain that I was given advice by a ghost on a park bench? I've thought about it a lot since then. The road remembers. The Delta is a place heavy with history, with pain and memory. Greenwood has a particularly dark past. I looked it up later. The lynchings, the civil rights struggles, the violence. It's a city that has seen more than its share of tragedy. Maybe some places, some nights, that memory becomes real. It bleeds through into the present, trapping unsuspecting travelers in the echoes of a past that the city refuses to forget. I was just a fly caught in a web of memory, and my only escape was to retrace my steps and refuse to enter the story. My route is my routine, my loop, But for 2 hours one night, I was trapped in a much older, much more terrifying one. My name is Tommy Reeves. I'm a flatbedder, been one since I was old enough to get my CDL. I'm out on the road for weeks, sometimes months at a time. It's a lonely life, but it's my life. The road is my home. And when you're on the road, truck stops are your towns. They're your restaurants, your motels, your post offices, your social clubs. You get to know them. You have your favorites, the ones with the good coffee or the clean showers. And you have the ones you avoid. But the truck stop I'm going to tell you about, it's not on any map. You won't find it on any app. It's a place that exists outside of the normal world, a place I stumbled into one night and barely managed to stumble out of. I was deadheading, driving an empty flatbed from a drop in Florida back to my home terminal in Arkansas. I was cutting across Mississippi on Highway 82, a road I've driven 100 times. It was late after midnight and I was tired and hungry. I was planning to push on for another hour to a big chain truck stop I knew in Greenville, but then I saw a sign. It was an old-fashioned sign, the kind you don't see much anymore, hand-painted on wood. It read, "The Evergreen Truck Stop, eats fuel, rest 1 mile." Below that, someone had painted, "Best coffee on 82." I'd never seen the sign before, never heard of the Evergreen. But I was tired, and the promise of coffee was too good to pass up. I figured it was just a small, independent place I'd always overlooked. I followed the sign, turning off the main highway onto a short access road. The truck stop was set back from the road, nestled in a grove of pine trees. It was like something out of a time capsule. The building was a low, rambling structure with a diner on one end and a small convenience store on the other. The fuel pumps were old, the kind with the spinning numbers inside a glass dome. The trucks parked in the lot were all older models, long-nosed Peterbilts and Kenworths from the 70s and 80s, all in pristine showroom condition. There wasn't a single modern aerodynamic rig in the lot. It was strange, but I just figured it was a hangout for guys who were into classic trucks. I parked my modern Freightliner at the end of a row where it stuck out like a sore thumb, and went into the diner. The moment I stepped inside, it was like stepping back 40 years. The booths were red vinyl, the tabletops were chrome-edged Formica, and there was a long counter with round spinning stools. The air smelled of frying bacon, stale cigarette smoke, and strong coffee. The place was clean, though, immaculately so. The diner was about half full. The patrons were all men, all truckers by the look of them. They wore mesh-back caps, flannel shirts, and worn denim. They were laughing and talking, drinking coffee, and eating plates piled high with food. A jukebox in the corner was playing a Patsy Cline song. I took a seat at the counter. The waitress who came over was a woman who looked to be in her late 40s. She had a beehive hairdo, wore a starched pink uniform, and had a kind, tired smile. She called me Han and poured me a cup of coffee without me even asking. "What can I get for you, hun?" she asked, her voice warm and friendly. "Just the coffee for now, thanks," I said. "And a piece of that apple pie if it's fresh." "Made it myself this morning," she said with a wink, and went to get my pie. The coffee was incredible. Rich, black, and strong, without a hint of bitterness. It was, without a doubt, the best coffee I'd ever had on the road. The pie was even better, with a flaky crust and a filling that tasted of fresh apples and cinnamon. I sat there, sipping my coffee, enjoying the atmosphere. It was comfortable. It felt safe. I struck up a conversation with the guy sitting next to me, a big man with a thick beard named Gus. He told me he'd been driving for 30 years, hauling timber. We talked about trucks, about the changing industry, about the good old days. Everyone was friendly. They welcomed me into their conversations, asked me about my run. It was the kind of easy camaraderie that's becoming rare in the anonymous world of modern trucking. I noticed something strange, though. They all talked about the present, but their present seemed to be stuck in the past. They complained about fuel prices, but the price they mentioned was under $1 a gallon. They talked about logbooks, but they were talking about the old paper logs, not the electronic ones that had been mandatory for years. They mentioned trucking companies that I knew had gone out of business a decade ago. I chalked it up to old-timers reminiscing. I finished my pie, had another cup of coffee, and spent what felt like a pleasant hour just shooting the breeze. I felt rested, refreshed, the weariness of the road completely gone. I paid my bill. The prices were also from another era, the coffee and pie barely costing $1, and left the friendly waitress a generous tip. As I was leaving, Gus clapped me on the shoulder. "You be careful out there, kid," he said. "It's a good life, but it'll keep you on the road forever if you let it." I walked out of the diner and back into the cool night air. I felt great. I got back in my truck, fired it up, and pulled out of the lot, waving to a few of the drivers who were standing outside, smoking. I got back on Highway 82 and continued west. About 30 minutes down the road, my phone rang. It was my dispatcher, and she sounded frantic. "Tommy, where the hell have you been?" she yelled. "I've been trying to reach you for 2 days. Your GPS has been offline." I was about to file a missing persons report. I was stunned. "What are you talking about, Sarah? I just talked to you yesterday afternoon." "No, you didn't," she said, her voice sharp with worry and frustration. "Your last check-in was 3 days ago when you were entering Mississippi. We've had no contact since. It's Thursday morning, Tommy. You were supposed to be in Arkansas yesterday." I looked at the clock on my dashboard. It read 2:15 a.m. I looked at the day-date display. It read THU. Thursday. I had pulled into that truck stop on a Monday night. I had lost 2 entire days. My blood ran cold. It wasn't possible. I had been in that diner for an hour, maybe 2 at the most. I hadn't slept. I had just had coffee and pie and talked to some old-timers. How could I have lost 2 days? My mind raced back to the truck stop, the old trucks, the vintage clothes, the talk of paper logs and cheap fuel, the jukebox playing Patsy Cline. It wasn't a retro-themed diner. It was real. I had stumbled into a place that was stuck in time, a place operating on a different clock than the rest of the world. And the people, the friendly waitress, Gus, the timber hauler, all the drivers. A chilling thought occurred to me. I had been there for what felt like an hour, but 2 days had passed in the outside world. For them, how long had they been there? They talked about driving for 30 years, but did they mean in the real world or in the timeless world of the evergreen? It's a good life, but it'll keep you on the road forever if you let it. Gus's words came back to me, no longer a friendly piece of advice, but a terrible literal warning. I was so shaken I had to pull over. I sat on the shoulder of the highway, the phone still pressed to my ear, Sarah's worried voice a distant buzz. I thought about the name. The evergreen, a place that is always green, always the same, never changing, never aging. The people in that truck stop weren't old-timers. They were drivers just like me who had pulled off the road one night for a cup of coffee and a piece of pie. They had found a place so comfortable, so friendly, so perfect, that they had decided to stay a little longer. And a little longer, and a little longer. They were trapped, not by bars or chains, but by contentment. They were ghosts, not of the dead, but of the living, their lives endlessly looping in a perfect, timeless moment, while the world outside rushed by without them. They hadn't aged a day, but they had lost decades. I made it to Arkansas, my mind a wreck. A few weeks later, I had to do the same run back across Highway 82. I had to know. As I approached the spot where I had seen the sign, I slowed down, my eyes scanning the side of the road. There was no sign. There was no access road. There was just a thick, impenetrable grove of pine trees right by the highway. There was no trace that the evergreen truck stop had ever existed. I am 31 years old. I have a life, a family I want to have someday. I have a future. The men in that truck stop, they have only the past, a perfect repeating present that has stolen their future. I was lucky. I only lost 2 days. But I wonder if I had stayed for another cup of that perfect coffee, if I had ordered a full meal, if I had decided to get a few hours of sleep in that quiet, safe-looking lot. Would I ever have left? Or would I still be there now, sitting at that counter talking to Gus about the good old days? Another ghost in the machine, forever young and forever lost on the road. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, let me know in the comments. Which one chilled you the most? Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Horror Whispers for more terrifying tales.